Anyway, so I'm Ann Friedman. The other members of the Retiree Chapter Anti-Racism Committee are Cecilia McCall, Dave Cuddlechuck, Jackie DeSalvo, Marcia Newfield, Joan Greenbaum, and Doris Hart. And we put this program together as a team, and I'm sure it's going to be a very enlightening one. In addition, in a national response to the dramatic explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement, activists, policymakers, and academics have focused sharply on the role of police in our society.
Okay.
Phrases like defund the police, police reform, broken windows, bail reform, etc., have become endemic in our public discourse. Eric Adams, a former police captain, is positioned to be elected tomorrow as mayor, and he's campaigned on the issue of safety in our streets, saying that everyone deserves to feel safe in their homes and their neighborhoods. Today's panel will address the realities of policing on the ground in our cities, and in particular in our city here in New York. We will look at police brutality and the expansion of the role of law enforcement in areas of mental health and drug use.
Always been a lot easier to handle than a sad one.
Can everybody be on mute, please? Okay, I'm going to introduce the three speakers first, and then they will begin and speak for about 40 minutes, and that will be followed by Q&A and discussion that will be chaired by either Bill or myself. So Alex Vitale, many of you know, Alex was actually a former chair of his chapter at Brooklyn College, a PSC chapter chair. He is the author of The End of Policing, a professor of sociology, and coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College. He has, for over 25 years, been writing about policing and consults with police department and human rights organizations internationally. Alex will speak first, followed by Christina Sparrock, who's a certified public accountant and mental health advocate for Fountain House, a national nonprofit, and has spent her career fighting for racial and social justice. She has worked with the New York City Police Department on de-escalation techniques and crisis intervention when dealing with those in emotional distress. Jawanza Williams is a social justice activist and director of youth organizing for Voices of Community Activists and Leaders, known as Vocal New York, a grassroots organization that advocates for social reform in policing, the treatment of narcotics users, and aiding victims of housing insecurity. So, Alex, you're on.
Thank you, Anne. And it's such a pleasure to be in such familiar company here. So many faces on my screen. I just want to shout out to everyone. So it's so lovely. Some people that I've obviously not been able to see in quite a long time. So really a pleasure. And also to be joined by Christina and Jawanza is always great for me. I'm such a huge admirer of the work that they are doing. And this is not the only union that is engaging these questions. You know, I recently spoke at the National Convention for National Nurses National Nurses United. Yes, and anyway, one of the national nurses unions. I have some other union engagements coming up. So this is an important topic for labor to consider, in part because, especially as public sector workers, this issue has a huge impact on budgets, mostly at the city level, but also at the state and the federal level. So let me get into it. I'll talk for about another 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll hear from the other speakers and have some time for Q&A. So listen, in the period around 7 years ago, after the police killing of Eric Garner here in New York, Mike Brown in Ferguson, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, so many others, we were told, don't worry, we're going to fix policing. President Obama created a national task force on 21st century policing, populated with police leaders and professional reformers, et cetera. And they issued a raft of recommendations, everything from body cameras to implicit bias training to new systems of accountability. And a lot of departments implemented a huge amount of this program. Here in New York, the NYPD got body cameras, implicit bias training, de-escalation training, changes to use of force policies. The CCRB's powers were expanded. The officers involved in the killing of George Floyd had had implicit bias training, de-escalation training, mindfulness training. We're wearing body cameras. We're operating under a new, more restrictive use of force policy. We're operating under a new policy that required officers intervene if they see misconduct by a fellow officer, a so-called bystander policy. And they were operating under a new accountability system designed to identify officers with patterns of misconduct, like Derek Chauvin. And none of it made any difference. And I don't think anyone who watched the policing of the protests summer a year ago in New York feels that the NYPD has been de-escalated, that it has been reformed, despite plowing tens and tens of millions of dollars into these reform efforts. There was a very powerful indictment, for instance, of the NYPD's sex crimes unit in the New Republic this week. The voices of victims of sexual violence over and over again describing the utter disdain of the NYPD for the well-being of rape victims. This is despite the fact that just 3 years ago, the city council poured millions of additional dollars into the sex crimes unit to reform it. And no one involved can see any difference in how women are being treated and the utter failure of the NYPD to make women safer. So that's why summer a year ago, the signs on the streets did not say more money for body cameras, more money for training. Instead, they said defund the police. Now, that particular three-word phrase was new to many people, but it did capture some important elements of the movement, if incompletely, which is the idea that this is a matter of budgets, that police are getting all the money at the expense of other government services. Here in New York, the NYPD budget is greater than the spending on health and human services, parks, homelessness, youth services, combined. And we were promised in last year's budget, oh, we're going to cut it back. We're going to put a limit on overtime. Well, we have about 6-8 months left in the budget season, and the NYPD has already exceeded their entire overtime budget for the year with no accountability, no brakes on that spending. And so it is a bureaucracy that is completely out of control. And we have a mayor who has shown absolutely no interest in doing anything about it, except putting more money into reform and telling us that things like implicit bias training are going to fix policing. And this is ridiculous. The department or the mayor has been trying to say, oh, the problems that people are complaining about the racial disparities of policing can be fixed with a few hours of training designed to address unconscious, unintentional bias by officers. And this can't possibly work. For one thing, we have a problem of explicit racism in American policing. When we look for it, we find it. The chat boards, the Facebook pages, The recently, removed from office head of the Sergeants Benevolent Association, was engaged in racist discourse on a regular basis. But it's also a mistake to say that the problems of policing are just about the intentional racism of a few officers here and there. We also have a problem of institutional racism. The reality is that policing was created as a tool for managing and reproducing racial inequality in our society. That's the nature of that institution. And I don't have time to get into the deeper history of that. I do in my book. But we have another problem, even on top of that. Even if we could replace the culture within the NYPD, the larger problem is an institutional racism problem. And that is the decision by elected officials to turn the problems of poor and non-white communities into problems of crime to be solved by policing, courts, jails, and prisons. When better off communities have problems, they get resources for their young people, for their communities. They get nicer parks, they get after school programs. But when poor Black and brown communities have problems, these get labeled as crime problems. And so a few hours of training does nothing to address any of that. We have a problem of mass criminalization of the most vulnerable communities in our society. And the results of that process, even when carried out in a professional, well-trained manner, are still fundamentally unjust. The NYPD continues to wage a wide-ranging war on drugs that targets the most vulnerable and least well-off members of our community in a way that produces absolutely no meaningful public benefits. No lives are saved, no one's prevented from getting drugs, and millions of young people's lives are ruined by their involvement in the criminal legal system. And the solution to that is not to give narcotics units anti-bias training. The solution is to end the war on drugs, which is exactly what voters in Oregon did last November, a year ago, is they voted in favor of the decriminalization of low-level possession of all drugs, heroin, ecstasy, cocaine, everything, and turn the problem over to public health officials, which is where it belongs. They were following the lead of Portugal, which did this about a decade ago, and they have been extremely happy with the results. Overdose deaths are down, transmission of communicable diseases are down, usage rates have not increased, society did not collapse because they decriminalized drugs. We could do this. We've started with marijuana in some places, but we need to go much further. We hear, oh, well, body cameras are going to save us. But the research shows this is not true. We were told, yes, body cameras mean that you're going to have to give up some of your privacy, but we're going to get police accountability in exchange for that. But what we've seen is no accountability. We had a high quality experimental study of body cameras done in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. The results were reported on the front page of the New York Times, in part because they were so shocking. They took neighborhoods with similar demographics and paired them and similar crime rates, and they gave some officers, the officers in some neighborhoods, body cameras, and the others they didn't. And they found absolutely no effect of the body cameras on any variable they could measure. But interestingly, the city of DC, of Washington, DC said, well, we don't care about that. We're going to give them to all officers because we're using them for evidence gathering. So in other words, body cameras have merely expanded the surveillance capacities of policing and have done nothing to produce positive changes in policing. And this is the problem with reform after reform. The research shows they don't work because they're not designed to work. They're designed to restore legitimacy to policing. And the problem there is that we're using policing to paper over a set of political and economic problems created by the exact politicians who are trying to sell us police reform. What we've seen happen, and I'm sure you all know this very well over the last 40, 50 years, is this embracing of austerity. In the face of global competition, which these elected officials themselves helped unleash, local places have been beset by this race to the bottom, where they feel that they have to cut taxes for the already most successful parts of the economy and cut services to pay for that, in hopes that some of those wealthy people will become so wealthy that their well-being will trickle down to the rest of us. But as PSC members know well, our salaries have not kept pace with inflation over this entire time period. CUNY has been defunded. The burden has been placed on students to take out loans and pay ever higher tuition rates, and the overall quality of services has declined. And then we're told that when there are problems on campus, we need to hire more CUNY security. CUNY created the SAFE teams that can respond to primarily political protest organized by students opposing austerity. But this is the problem across the board. This kind of neoliberal austerity politics has not produced widespread well-being. It has produced mass homelessness, mass untreated mental health and substance abuse problems, failed schools, widespread involvement in underground economies of drugs and sex work and stolen goods. And then the solution to those problems has become mass criminalization through policing and mass incarceration. And the solution to this is to demand real resources to address the safety needs of communities in ways that build people up, that restore the harms of 40, 50 years of austerity, and that create broader economic well-being in our society. And no amount of police reform can accomplish that. We need to bring counselors back to schools. We need to create community-based anti-violence efforts while we work on the long-term problems of entrenched racialized poverty at the core of New York and American society more broadly. So thanks for your attention, and I'm going to turn it over to Christina, and then a little bit later, I'll be happy to take some questions. Christina, it's all yours.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited about this. So let me tell you a little about myself. My name is Christina Sparrock. I'm a certified public accountant, and I'm the Fountain House New York City advocacy advisor. I became an advocate maybe about in 2013 when I had my first experience with the police. I was with my girlfriend at her house, and I live with bipolar disorder, and I was at her house and we went to college together. And I used to witness her like hitting her husband, having emotional and violent attacks in the streets, going from 0 to 100. But her family didn't do anything about it. They just figured if she went to yoga, everything would be okay. So one day she and I had a discussion, and then she snapped and she started to assault me. And in my response, I started crying and I called 911. And the mistake that I made when I called 911, I said to them that I live with bipolar and I need help. Now, at that point, I wasn't experiencing any emotional crisis. I mean, I was experiencing emotional crisis, but I wasn't having a mental health breakdown or episode. But when the police responded, they responded to me as an EDP. And in the police terminology, EDP stands for an emotionally disturbed person. And that's a derogatory term. And so she was able to, they didn't treat me like a human being when they responded. I wasn't able to file a police report. They didn't investigate the scene. Her husband, was able to control them and file a false police complaint against me. And she was able to flee the scene of the crime. So that's when I became an advocate, because I realized if I was having these issues with NYPD, then my other brothers and sisters out there were having the same problems as well. So I know you want to know why police should not respond to mental health calls, and these are the reasons why. So the bottom line, as Alex just explained, despite all the extensive training and funding that is for NYPD, cops are still not trained to respond to mental health calls. It is actually their culture, which is it's their implicit bias and explicit bias. It's their training. And one of the trainings that they have is called CIT training, which is crisis intervention training. And that training came from a Memphis model where police are trained in de-escalation techniques and crisis communication skills when dealing with people who live with, who are in emotional crisis, who live with mental health concerns. But to me, I rather call it bias training or racist training because I'm gonna tell you why. For one, as peers, I'm a peer with lived experience. They didn't include peers as part of the training. We weren't part of the planning or design of the CIT training program. And as many of us know, people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. Peers were only allowed 1 hour to share their stories at the police academy, which was a 40-hour training, which was trained by social workers and police officers. For me to be there for only 1 hour, there's no way for police to actually understand my experience and what I'm going through, and for me to be able to teach them how to unlearn their bad behaviors. Peers were never included in the planning and design from the very beginning. We were never allowed to provide any feedback or input on best practices. So basically, peers, we were just silent partners as part of the CIT training program. Also, part of the CIT training program, mental health wasn't taught as a human condition, like cancer or diabetes. So police are not trained to be humans themselves or identify with their own undealt trauma. When you think about police, they deal with PTSD, they deal with a lot of struggles that everybody else has, but they're not taught to deal with it on their own. So it's basically our training is more like it's us versus them type of training, which creates bias, resentment, and separation towards people living with mental health conditions. Lastly, police are not taught to deal with their traumas. When you think about it, like I said, again, police live with PTSD and alcoholism. And in 2019, it was reported that 228 police died by suicide. The use of EDP in their patrol manual is about 100 times written throughout the NYPD patrol manual. So without a doubt, people living with the mental health conditions are people and deserving of dignity and respect, but the police don't treat us as such because they're taught that we're emotionally disturbed people. I'd rather be called a person first because I'm a person first. And if I happen to have a mental health and I'm in crisis, I'd rather be called a person experiencing a crisis or person in crisis. When you have words have power. They shape our beliefs, our behaviors, and teach us how to interact and discriminate against other people. So that language of EDP must change in the patrol guide. To further argue why police shouldn't be involved, the CIT International, the governing body of all the CIT programs in this country, they even state in their own manual, the presence of police may upset an individual in crisis and escalate the situation. Even CIT officers who are highly trained to de-escalate a crisis may be frightening because of their vehicles and uniforms. And that is so true. I recently had a personal experience where police were doing a wellness check. Now, when you think about a wellness check, you think about a visiting nurse coming over or ambulance coming over to check if, your vital signs. No, since I have a mental health condition and the police in my area knows I have one because of the location history, because they document every time they come to my house, they come with lots of cops just for a wellness check. So they came for a wellness check. And I live in a doorman building, but I didn't know they were here. So all I heard was pounding and pounding and pounding on my door. And so the immediate reaction was like fear, flight, or something. And I ran into my kitchen. I grabbed a knife. I didn't know who it was at all. I'm a woman. I'm living in New York City. You hear every day in the news, crime. If my door was unlocked, those officers would have came in my house and shot me because I'm an emotionally disturbed person and I had a weapon. Meanwhile, I was the one that was in danger and I was afraid because someone was on my door knocking and the doorman didn't let me know who it was. So I would have been killed and they would have been justified, which is totally wrong. So the bottom line is that police should not be responding to mental health calls. Mental health is a public health response. So let me just show you some slides for an example, really quickly. How do I share my screen? Share. Here we go. So back in 2017, a man by the name of Miguel Richards was in his home, right? And his nosy landlord hadn't seen him for a while. So what the landlords decided to do, he called the police for a wellness check. I just mentioned what a wellness check was. They came into his house and they just like, oh, how do I do this? 1 second. Can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm gonna show it this way because I don't know how to do it the other way. So they came into his house, as you can see, probably to the right arm, then you saw it into the blurring images to the left. Those are his neighbors leaving the building. So when a wellness check happens, it's kind of embarrassing when cops are coming to you because now all your neighbors know, and automatically you're stigmatized as a criminal or mentally ill person or whatever people want to think, terrorist or whatever. So they barge into his room only because his landlord was so nosy to say that he hasn't seen him in a while. Now, a lot of times, a lot of us must stay alone in our homes and it's okay. And if your neighbor doesn't see you, it's perfectly fine. But for some reason, they came into his house, right?
Christina, you need to advance the slides. All we see is Miguel's name.
Oh, okay. Got it. Do you see that?
No, yes, now we do.
That's the
Okay,
second
great.
one.
All right, terrific. Right. So they came into his house, right? And so they were screaming at him and he stood in the corner, very quiet. He had his sunglasses on because he was afraid. They came in there with tasers, they came in there with guns, right? And so and an amount of, I think they shot him, they waited about, not on how many minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes, or they waited, but then they ended up shooting him 16 times, right? He didn't have a weapon or anything, right? And so what happened was once they shot him, they dragged his body around the floor like a rag doll. They didn't call for emergency, like a medical care. The only thing they were looking for was a weapon because they assumed that he had a knife and a gun, which he didn't have at all, right? And so reports showed later that they had planted a fake gun, which he didn't have. But where was the de-escalation? There was no way to de-escalate it because no one even asked what was going on, how was he feeling? They just barged in his room with knives and guns. I mean, with guns and tasers. So if a peer would have responded, this would have been more of an appropriate response because I know you're probably wondering, so how should they respond to someone in a mental health crisis? For one, anybody who responds should control their emotion, like a peer should control their emotions, or if an officer was there, which we don't want them to be there because automatically officers trigger people because of their uniforms, the sirens, the guns, the military style. And you take your time to actually slow down the emotions of a person. It just takes time because people get escalated. And eventually when you're high, you calm down eventually. When you come into someone's house, you knock, you ask permission, be respectful, right? Ask permission. Can I come in? Do you mind? I heard maybe something's going on. Can I stand by your doorway? Don't just intrude on someone's space. And it's also about the tone of your voice. You just don't start screaming and yelling, and your body language is like 80%. If you come in very aggressive, they're going to see that. And space is also important too. And keep your words very simple because when a person has a mental health break, including myself, I have a lot of words flowing in my head. I have rapid speech, racing thoughts, and I may just have like one, like some rational thoughts in it, but most of my thoughts are just like erratic. Also, it's always listen to understand the person. Don't talk over the person when they're trying to explain to you what they're going through. And collect information from them. Ask open-ended questions because they want to know that you're actually concerned about them. Don't make it about you. Make it about the person. Validate their experience and what's happening. And actually repeat back what they're saying. Like have a conversation and be engaged with that individual. And at times you may have to contact a familiar person, like a parent. It's like, I noticed that, Miguel is having a moment right now. What can I do to make him feel more comfortable? Oh, he likes ice cream. That's terrific. I'll go buy him a favorite ice cream on the corner and bring it over so we can have that conversation and make him feel more comfortable, like I'm a trusted person. Stop building that rapport. Um, Also, when you're listening to a person, assess the needs. The person may be saying to you, oh my God, I got evicted from my housing, or I lost my job, or something happened to me. Listen to that and actually help that person find solutions for the problem that they're going through now, because obviously that problem is what triggered them. When you start hearing a person talk about more negative things or more things, maybe suicide, try to redirect them to something else more positive. Like if Miguel had on a Yankees t-shirt on, I would say, hey, I heard the Yankees did good that week, or Derek Jeter this, or, find something that you could talk about to them about this, something that make them feel very comfortable. And then find out some things that you may have in common as well. Don't always talk, try to do more listening, and constantly reassess the situation and be patient with the person. See, the problem with police, they come in and within 7 minutes, they want to have a solution. No, crisis de-escalation takes time. It could take 20 minutes, it could take hours. Take your time, because you're trying to de-escalate to the person to be able to think rationally. Okay, and then find something comforting, like I said. So if the police would have taken the time to get to know Miguel Richards as a peer would, like myself, they would have known that Miguel was a loner. He was one semester away from earning his bachelor's degree in information technology. He was 31 years old, that just moved from to the Bronx in 2017 as part of an exchange program. He had family. He played video games with his brother. He loved the color blue, and he was never diagnosed with a mental health diagnosis. They just made that assumption. Is there any other? So stop share. So that's what I want to talk about, basically share about, mental health. It's about definitely the police should not be responding. It should have more of a person-centered approach with peers. The training is very biased. And I think we need to focus more on not just the crisis, but also like the prevention and intervention. If our electeds would spend more funding on keeping money in the community, like having 24/7 mental health clinics, like we have city MDs on every corner, or more respite centers where people can go there as an alternative to hospitalization, where they can get a room and a key and have peers in the same facility be able to talk to them every day and give them supports and comfort. If we were able to have our pastors or that grandma on the corner who makes apple pie every week and have everybody at her house. We have violence interrupters and community responders in our community. It's important that we keep people in the community and not in the criminal legal system or being stigmatized because of their mental health. So I wrap that up. And so Jawanza, it is your turn. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Christina, for sharing all of that. And that list of sort of best practices for engaging with people in crisis is super helpful. I'll take a screenshot of that and we'll be sharing it. No, and also thank you, of course, to Alex, and thank you to PSC. I'm really honored to be here to have a conversation. I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes because I know folks have a lot of questions in the chat that I really want to hear the answers to as well. Also, thank you so much, Anne, for that wonderful introduction. Though I was a youth organizer in my first role at Vocal, and now I'm the director of organizing across the board for the organization. And just for some clarity, again, my name's Jawanza. I use he, him pronouns. And Vocal New York is a statewide membership organization building power to end AIDS, homelessness, mass incarceration, and the drug war, and its consequences, the overdose crisis and the hepatitis C pandemic or epidemic in New York State, while also building an economy and democracy that actually functions for our membership, the people that are directly impacted by these issues, who tend to be Black, brown, extremely low income, if they have income at all. And we have chapters in Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, Albany, Westchester County, and of course, the 5 boroughs. So I feel like Alex stole a lot of my thunder to really talk about, what is the real problem here. So I'll just go a little bit deeper where he probably goes more in his book. But I think fundamentally, and here's the situation we find ourselves in, really in this country, but really globally, we're talking about what it means. I'll slow down in speaking, sorry. We're talking about fundamental questions about identity that we are disagreeing about across the board. And typically we can think about it in terms of right wing, left wing, and everybody else in between. And I think that fundamentally, it's why we have, for instance, a Blue Lives Matter in response to Black Lives Matter, as if a blue life is an identity that is immutable from human beings. This is an occupation, not an identity. And the fact that it has been sort of conflated to mean that has created a number of issues that we see continue to create the circumstances for violence that then the police themselves are supposed to respond to, even though they are the ones ultimately that are creating, I think Christina sort of talked about it briefly, this sort of culture of us versus them. And I think it has immediate and like real-time consequences. Like right now, yesterday in Staten Island, we saw a massive anti-vaccine rally where, you know, they were saying, you know, town halls are going to burn down, schools are going to burn down, because we're not going to be taking these vaccines, and we're firefighters and we're cops, etc. And it's, and one person even in notes like, hey, we don't want to go into violence, but we are prepared for that. And they mention guns and mention these kinds of things. And it's because I think it's not just about the right to a vaccine or not to a vaccine. It's about this fundamental question about who people are and what their rights are. And too often, can you still hear me? And too often, I think we like the sort of framework of reality, the sort of idea, the worldview that the vast majority of people are operating from are rooted in anti-Black, anti-woman, anti-queer, anti-all things good, like frameworks and ideologies. And I think so much of that big picture is connected to the preservation of power, the sort of distribution of wealth and economic power. So capitalism is really, I think, at the core of all of these problems in our society. And as a justification for organizing our society in a way that is inherently abusive and exploitative, you have to have some means of justification for people. And that's where we get these big lies like white supremacy, because you need a culture that accepts the idea that it's okay for some people to have and other people to not have. And there has to be some justification for that. And one of the ways that we have done that is through the creation of the monster, the creation of the problem, the mythologizing of human beings. And I think the drug war, and here's where I'm really trying to go, the drug war, the primary vehicle of mass incarceration in this country. Remember, the vast majority of people that are outside of prisons across our country are not people that have been, that are sexual, predators. They're not people that have stolen children. They're not people that have run multi-billion-dollar corporations that have threatened the continuity of the human species. But it's people that smoke crack. It's people that sell crack. It's people that had marijuana in one community and got arrested for it, but in another community, they don't get arrested at all. So I'm saying that to say, I want to kind of get into the defund conversation that Alex was talking about, because one of the things that I think failed in the last year's uprising about like our sort of raising of a sort of mass consciousness about the problems of policing as a structural phenomena, as a cultural phenomena. But I find it very alarming whenever folks are moving to end mass incarceration, to end police violence, and there's no centering of mental health care crises or mental health care complexities, when there's no centering of the vast apparatus of state oppression that is the drug war, because we have to be able to draw those connections. And the fact is that we're running out of time to not be able to do that, because so much of it are the same rationale, the same sort of politics, the same sort of orientations that lead to things like the climate crisis, like nuclear war, et cetera. I mean, it's really all intimately connected. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that defund, number one, is not exactly abolitionist. It is, I would say, on an abolitionist track, because it's helping people sort of understand the sort of thought processes, and also helping fundamentally transform the conditions that our people are in, so that we can actually begin to have more imaginative conversations, more informed conversations about how do we organize our society and maintain and expand safety, not just for some people, but for all of us. And honestly, if you ask the most vulnerable people, as Alex was also referring to, I'm thinking about Black trans woman who is experiencing homelessness, who uses drugs, who has a mental health care diagnosis, and is a sex worker. Like, if you ask her what are the top 10 things that she needs to maintain her safety, I guarantee you that the police will not be on that list, even though they're some of the most vulnerable people to all manner of violence from all across the society, structurally and interpersonally. And still, the police are not the solution to that. So it begs the question, what are the solutions? And it fundamentally challenges us again. And here's the problem. It fundamentally challenges people's sense of what is true and their sense of themselves. So I think it's a lot. So I think that's the sort of conflict with reform. Like, I think someone's unmuted. So I guess there's so much to share, and I really rather just be in conversation. But the last thing I'll say is that again, Alex mentioned Oregon and the decriminalization of possession of small amounts of drugs that have been illegal for a long time in the U.S. We're headed that direction in New York State as well. It's not exactly public, but we have a bill that is equivalent to the bill to decriminalize possession of all drugs in small amounts and in New York State. So that's going to be a big fight for the next, I would imagine, 2 to 3 years, 5 years. But that's where we're headed next. And I think I really want to, if people are weird about the idea of decriminalization, and I really think legalization of all substances that people use, I think it's important that we ask the question, well, how did I develop my perspective about violence, about crime, about the problem of drugs? And am I applying the problems of poverty, of austerity, of sort of structural societal failings, and am I blaming the drug? And because the drugs are not the problem, like you can put, that's not the issue. So, and I think that that's a mass unlearning that has to happen. But again, it fundamentally challenges what people believe to be the truth, which is why things like critical race theory, which the vast majority of people that are talking about it don't actually understand it, is because whenever we have these conversations, we are challenging the story that people have told themselves, the story that people really believe in. And these are very scary things. And I think the other thing I want to mention, and I know I keep jumping big picture and little picture, but another thing I think at the core of our problem with the truth in this society is that we just simply have not had truth and reconciliation for the enslavement of African people in this country. Until we're able to actually do that, conversations like defund or abolition of the police or the rights of police versus civilians, etc., we're always going to keep running into these big sort of brick walls because we just simply we're not actually operating from a baseline of what is real, what are the parts that we're using. If we're using mythologies like white supremacy, if we're using mythologies like the home of the free started specifically for democracy and not mention and not meaningfully contend with the fact that there is an indigenous genocide, that there is the enslavement of people, that whenever we talk about the freedoms of everyone, we're not actually talking about everyone. If we don't really contend with that, these conversations just seem so bizarre and so off kilter. But many of us who have lived experiences as Black people, as the descendants of enslaved people, the people that have relationships and community with people that use drugs, whenever you grow up in in Texas, and I'll pause soon, when you grow up in Texas and I have a set of cousins, I have a giant family, a giant, beautiful Black family. And I promise you, like maybe 8 or 9 of my second cousins, they all turned 15 and then they all disappeared. And then they returned at 21, 22, 23, 26, unable to do anything meaningful with their lives because of how devastated they've been by the drug war. And not just the drug war, but also the sort of economic, socio-political factors that led to them selling drugs in the first place. So I'll pause there. There's just so much to talk about, so much to share, and so much to reconsider and to sort of reframe. And I think fundamentally what the sort of capitalist powers in our society have worked double time to force the vast majority of us to think everything can be understood in a 2-minute now this video, that everything can be understood by reading a couple of tweets. But the reality is there are complexities that we have to hold. There's this is a very complicated story. And one last thing I'll drop is that I feel like a really profound documentary that really explores the thing that I'm trying to talk about is by Raoul Peck, the Exterminate All the Brutes. It's a 4-part documentary about the history of white supremacy, of imperialism, of genocide, of the Holocaust, and the enslaved. I mean, it just tells the whole story. And he just, the sort of line is, the reality is that he opens with and ends with, like, I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know. We all know the story. So like, what is the real problem here? And I think that the problem is truth and reconciliation with slavery. So I'll pause there and pitch it back to Anne.
Okay, thank you so much, Jawanza and Christina and Alex. That is certainly a lot for us to think about and discuss and question. So Bill is having technical problems, so I'm going to facilitate this next part. If you have a question, and if you could try to pose it to a particular panelist, that would be useful. If you want more of them to respond, that's okay too. And if we can try to keep the questions brief, more of us can participate. So I think most of you know the drill, but I will go over it. You go, in order to raise your hand, you go down to the very bottom of your screen. It says reactions. And right above that, you will see a whole bunch of cute little emoticons or whatever they call them. And you just press raise your hand, and people will come up in a queue, and I will call on people in that order. Cecilia is helping to keep the queue. I guess we can take a couple of questions together, and then the speakers can respond, see how that works. Okay, so Cecilia, remind me, I see Paula Whitlock.
Yes, that's what I see.
Okay, I don't see a list. I see them on the screen. So why don't you tell me who?
Paula Whitlock. First, I see Paula Whitlock, then David Kotelchuk.
Okay, Paula.
Hi. Hi to Alex, but this question is actually for Christina. And my nephew is a New York City firefighter who is vaccinated. And he says that they get calls, people call in saying that they have gas leak. And when they arrive, it's actually some family disturbance going on. And they have to deal with it. My nephew actually has medical training, but I was wondering your opinion. Are the firefighters any better than the police at responding when there is a crisis in a family?
That's a good question. So I'm not familiar necessarily with the firefighters training, but to me, it just seems like it's still more like involved in the city. And I think it's more important, like if peers are involved in training, like city work, any first responder is going to be out there. I believe that peers like myself should be training these individuals and actually also being first responders in certain situations as well.
Thank you.
Paul, let me just add, look, firefighters don't kill people when they respond. Between 1.25% of all people killed by police in the United States are having a mental health crisis. But that doesn't change Christina's real answer, which is the solution is not firefighters or even EMS really. It's creating community-centered response teams that have a peer-to-peer component. That's really the best practice we're seeing.
Thanks so.
And one last thing, which is in places that are doing this, they also do public education so that people learn that there's a new approach available and you're less likely to have these miscommunications, mislabeling of things when people know there's something other than police that could respond.
Can I add to that too? Thanks, Alex. And was it who was the one that asked the question?
Paula Whitlock.
Paula
Thank you,
Whitlock.
Paula. So what I did is like, I took the CIT training, and since I didn't really like how the training was conducted or the content, I created my own training called the PCIT training, called Person-Centered Intervention Training, where I taught New York City park officers in Fort Greene Park about person-centered approaches, about how to engage with people who are emotionally unwell. But I also taught them not just focus on crisis, focus on when people are well, becoming unwell, and then in crisis, because we spend too much emphasis on crisis. And so I have a pilot now. I have 2 peers in the park that work in the park 5 days a week, responding to people in Fort Greene community.
Okay, great. So what, Dave was next, Cecilia?
Yes, and then Joan Greenbaum.
Okay, my question is, Mayor de Blasio said last year that money was being transferred from the NYPD to the mental health city departments. That was reported in the news. What happened? Was money ever transferred? Did they reduce the budget by giving money into the mental health divisions for the city? Any one of the folks who spoke, be glad for a response.
So Dave, the city has created a small pilot project in Upper Manhattan to have a kind of EMS social work response to some calls. It's not going very well. The dispatchers are kind of refusing to dispatch them, in essence, and it's very small. It's a drop in the bucket. And the money did not come out of the NYPD budget.
Okay.
And the NYPD goes on almost 250,000 of these calls every year. And they don't want to give up that part of their budget.
Okay.
And to add to that, it's called the Be Heard program. And it's only operates 16 hours a day. In a lot of instances, cops are still responding to people in crisis. And how can you put 16 hours a day on a program? Because a mental health crisis can happen 24/7. You can't put a timer on it.
Right. Okay, thanks. That's helpful. So it's an experimental project, if you will. It's not comprehensive, and it's not going 24 hours a day.
It's not going 24 hours, but I'm part of the advisory committee, and they want to expand it citywide now. And it's not doing well at all.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, Joan.
Yes, thank you. So I thought the examples were really terrific, and the importance of transition to where we want to go, what makes logical sense to go in terms of ending a war on drugs and handling personal conflicts, and would require massive ongoing funding of public health, which we know is a huge endeavor, and mental health, which we know is even a bigger endeavor. That's not happening. Now, one of the things that I want to see us go there, and I think it's essential to transition there, but we need the political power to get money for public health and for mental health. And the police right now do have the power to get money. Now, this is not to support them. This is to say, how do we build the power to get money for public and emotional health, which, like education and CUNY, is the stepsister of all non-funding. Thank you.
Okay, Leanne Wharton.
Sorry.
Let's
Leanne,
let
sorry, I'm
Jawanza,
sorry,
let's
I'm
let
sorry.
Jawanza
Yeah.
respond to that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, who wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And I also want to simultaneously respond to a question in the chat about public drug use. So number one, I think about defund, one of the things that I think that the establishment who are interested in maintaining the power as is, or the status quo, one of the things that's lost is that defund isn't just about taking money from police and removing them from responding to certain, activities like mental health crises. It's also about reducing the power of the NYPD, the scope and the influence of this institution, of this practice of policing. So I think to answer your question directly though, Joan, I would say this is the importance of issue-based campaigns. Here's where the reform movements can relate to abolitionist movements, where, like, you know, I know that legalization of all substances that people use, regulation, and the creation of a safe supply is actually where we should be going. But I know that our organizations, of the organizations that are working in that sort of vein, simply don't have the power to do what you're saying. But while we're building that power, we use issue-based campaigns to reduce the amount of harm happening to people, to reduce the amount of people going to prison, and using that as an opportunity to catch those individuals, those communities, and pull them into the movement, thereby expanding our sort of political power, making it more possible for us to elect people that are willing to do the kinds of things that we need to happen. So I think this is a fundamental question about power. It's a cultural question. And I mean, I could talk more specifically about that, because that's literally what we're doing all the time at Vocal, and in coalition with organizations across the state and across the country through formations like the People's Action Institute and the Overdose Cohort. That's a number of organizations across the country that are working around that. Also, Center for Popular Democracy, another national formation of organizations across the country that has an opioid cohort that works on these issues on the city, state, and federal level. So I think more of that kind of work, and also, you know, people really being willing politically to say, hey, I don't know all the answers. I am unclear about a lot of things, but here's what the advocates are saying. Here's what the people directly impacted are saying. Here's what we should be trying to do, and we need to support those things. And to be totally frank, I think, you know, formations that have power, like unions, need to really understand, like, not everything's about the worker. And I think that, I know that's a controversial thing to say to a union, and though it's like, well, workers are part of a bigger community, and there's other things that are happening, and sometimes unions tend to stand in the way of a lot of the progressive policies that we need to pass because of all of these, you know, political situations. And just to the other question about public drug use, I want to say, what did it say exactly? Drug
In the
usage on the
chat,
street.
are you looking in the chat?
Yeah, drug usage on the streets of New York, like smoking weed in public parks surrounded by children and the elderly, is disconcerting. How should drug usage be orchestrated, if not by law enforcement? I think two things immediately. Number one, the same way that we have culturally made it inappropriate to drink alcohol in a park with children is the same thing we need to do with all substances. I think right now we can't divorce this conversation about public drug use without having a conversation simultaneously about homelessness and the mass homelessness crisis, because people that use drugs, whether they're rich or poor, they use drugs where they're comfortable or where they can. So like, if you have money, you use drugs inside, you don't go to the park. But if you have nowhere to go, you go to the park. So I think that, and I think the immediate sort of like triage response, which is what we've been working on as well in New York since 2014, is the implementation of safer consumption spaces, also known as supervised injection facilities or overdose prevention centers. You know, we need these kinds of establishments to be legalized and above ground so that people can avoid. No one wants to get high in a park, you know, like people want to use their drugs and they just need places to use them. So I think the response isn't to police people, but to create the infrastructure, the public health infrastructure, where we can solve a number of issues, do analysis about what are people's actual fundamental needs. Do they have housing? Do they have healthcare, including wraparound services and mental health care services? Like, what are the things that are missing? And the way that you really assess that isn't through a jail cell, but through, you know, medical facilities, places where people can actually be respected and dignified. And to the point, it's like, yeah, there's going to be people that are always going to do things like smoke in public or whatever. And I think we just want to become a kind of people that are like, hey, could you not smoke here? Like, we all know that, I mean, I didn't get to see it as much as probably you did, but people used to smoke cigarettes inside, and now everybody doesn't do that anymore. And we can do the same. That's a cultural thing. It's not a policing thing. Because could you imagine if someone lit up a cigarette in a restaurant and the police came, what would happen? Like, it's just not the right move. But I'll pause there.
Okay, thank you.
Leanne Wharton and Jackie DeSalvo. Leanne?
Hi. I know that I heard a lot of the conversation based around like defunding the police. I just wanted to hear people's opinion on whether they were more in favor of defunding or reducing the police force, police force, and if there was any specific community programs that people thought that the money would be better invested in that would further help the community, as opposed to moving away from policing, but other community programs that they think that that money should be invested in.
Well, Leanne, that is exactly what we're talking about, right? But the programs have to be tailored to the specific needs of local communities. So one thing people could look at is Tiffany Caban's public safety campaign. If I get a chance, I'll put it in the chat, which says for her community, these are the kinds of interventions: family support centers, violence reduction programs, homelessness drop-in centers, peer-to-peer mental health support, et cetera. So it's not one thing, it's a huge, long list of things that has to be tailored to the needs of specific communities.
Anybody else on that?
Yeah, just really quick, I was just describing overdose prevention centers or safer consumption spaces. These are the exact kinds of initiatives that I think universally need to happen. Like, so it's about taking money from their policing people that use drugs and instead putting that money into this kinds of systems where medical professionals are available to people that use drugs to reduce harms in a number of ways that it's too many to name. But I think those kinds of things, I think also what's at the core of what we're talking about, we're not saying explicitly, is the elimination of things that should not be crimes. Like if we could vastly reduce the amount of resources necessary for police in general, fundamentally, if we decriminalize drugs, legalize them even. And I think, so those kinds of things have to happen.
Okay, the next person is Jackie DeSalvo.
Yeah, hi. People are talking about, what the different forms of policing would be and that the change would have to be much more drastic. But I think underlying it all is something else. And that is the purpose of the police is to repress any kind of political assertion in the African-American community. The purpose of the police is to maintain class suppression and inequality. The Ehrlichman came out and said that. He was an advisor to Nixon, and he said the purpose of the war on drugs was to destroy the African-American movement in the streets. And I think that that's a much harder thing to figure out what to do about, because talking about what that was about, it was about taking the young Black men who in the past were the militant leadership of movements and putting them all in jail. So there were no organizers of that sort still in the Black community. So I think it's very difficult to figure out what to do without changing what the purpose of the policing is. The reason why the policing various reforms and all that Alex showed don't really work is because of what the purpose of the policing is. So,
Thanks, Jackie. I put in the chat a sort of an excerpt of one of the chapters of the book that tries to talk about this issue of the purpose of policing. And there's also a chapter in the book that deals explicitly with political policing, using police as a form of political repression. But basically, I agree with you that one of the central functions of the history of policing is the suppression of movements of resistance, not just African-American, but also anti-colonial movements, workers' movements, have all been the primary focus of policing, is the suppression of those movements.
Ah, look who's here. Bill, hello. All right, I can't hear Bill.
You're muted, Bill.
Cecilia?
Yes.
Oh, hi,
Now
Bill.
you can hear me, right?
Yep, and see you.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question that Blanca Vasquez raises in the chat. I don't know why Blanca didn't raise her hand, but I'll raise it for her. You know, she asked, can Alex address policing on CUNY campuses? I'd be interested, Alex, in how you see, you know, what you said playing out on CUNY campuses. So if you can address that.
Sure. Well, let's think about a few things here. One is, you know, what is the actual public safety situation at CUNY? We have very, very low crime, and most of what does happen happens from within the community, whether it's property theft or interpersonal violence. And so we've created this massive security apparatus, which is very expensive and primarily under the control of CUNY Central, to, in theory, keep us safe from crime. But what they really do is they just exclude outsiders. And they do almost nothing to actually help people within the community. Now, this is not because the officers have a bad attitude. I mean, we all know these security officers. Many of them have been with CUNY for a really long time. Most of us have good relationships with them, but there's very little they can do to actually address things. CUNY has one of the worst ratios of counselors to students of any university in the country. And yet we know that the kinds of problems that we can really have on campus often stem from folks who need support. It could include things like intimate partner problems. Some of the rare occurrences of violence on campus have been related to these kinds of intimate partner disagreements that have taken place on campus. But we don't have adequate funding for women's centers, rape crisis centers. We don't have family support centers, right? So what are we doing to actually produce safety among the college community? Having a bunch of guards check IDs at the gates, that does not produce the kind of safety that we need. And it certainly doesn't do anything to protect us from each other within the community, which again is where the real threat is. And then the last thing is that this CUNY security apparatus, apropos of what Jackie said before, has been driven largely by politics, which is a fear of the student body politically. The creation of the CUNY safe teams, the expansion of CUNY security has all happened in direct relationship to the rise of political movements within the student body.
Okay,
And that's why CUNY Central wants to keep such a tight control over it.
Yeah, I see Leanne Wharton's hand again. Do you have another question, Leanne?
Yes, Professor, I was just gonna reference to what you were just saying, as far as, do you believe that the CUNY police are acting in the same or similar manner as the NYPD is acting towards society? The CUNY police are acting towards the students in relation to, since it's been admitted that CUNY police are not able to deal with the low crime, because seeing as there is low crime and the issues that many students do come across, whether it be mental health issues or issues that involve going to the women's center per se or anything of that nature, they do, although the CUNY isn't fully funding those programs, the programs still do exist. So they do have like psychological counselors that you can talk to. So is there necessarily even a need for the same CUNY police? Because although, like you said, these programs are not fully funded by CUNY, the programs still do exist, and there's other avenues that people could turn to. So it was like,
so look, Leanne, it should be handled like the needs of any community are handled, which is that we should have a real assessment process. We should go onto campuses, should bring people together to talk about concretely what are the public safety challenges that the community faces. And we got to get past just giving people a survey and then people just mouth what they hear in the air. Let's really talk to people. Let's really look at some facts, the fact that there's almost no crime on CUNY campuses, and have a rational assessment of what would really make students, faculty, and staff and visitors safer. And it turns out the millions and millions of dollars we spend on CUNY security is probably not the best way to do that.
Bill, your hand is still up. Do you have another question?
Well, actually, I do. Tomorrow is election day. We're going to elect a new city council. I think most of the city council is term limited, so there are going to be lots of new faces on the city council. Obviously, we're going to have a new mayor. I don't think there's any doubt about who it's going to be. Next year, of course, there's a gubernatorial election, and the whole state assembly and state senate are up for election. I think a lot of us feel that in the last election, we elected probably a much more progressive state senate and state assembly than we had before. So my question is this: are there any particular legislative initiatives that you see either coming through the city council or through the state senate or the state assembly, addressing the issues that you highlighted? I mean, you mentioned actually one candidate for city council, that's Tiffany Caban, who's running for a seat in Queens. I don't know if she has a particular program that she wants to bring to the council.
So I put Tiffany's plan in the chat. It's very extensive, and I'm working with her office on trying to focus in on some specific priorities, but that's going to be the result not of Tiffany and I talking abstractly. It's going to be the result of a community engagement process. I'm also working with Alexa Aviles here in Brooklyn to do a similar process for parts of her district in Red Hook. Tiffany's view is that about half the incoming members of the city council, assuming that, the Democrats win their races, which is 99% certain, that over half of them campaigned on some form of reducing our reliance on the NYPD and investing in new community-based strategies. So there's a strong mandate at the city council for funding these kinds of new initiatives. And so I think even though there's been a lot of talk about the mayor and, his kind of bellicose rhetoric about unleashing the police, the reality is that he's long been a supporter of a lot of these same community investments. And he's also very skeptical about a lot about the NYPD. So I think, there was the rhetoric that was mobilized to get elected in a particular moment when homicides were, spiking and the media discourse was running amok with a lot of misrepresentation about rising crime, which wasn't true, et cetera. But when he's met with the reality of governing, I think he's going to find tremendous pressure to invest in all of these non-police strategies. And that's going to create a lot of political space for questioning the never-ending overtime budget and the constant expansion of the, I think over time, we're going to see some big changes there.
I also wanted to add to that, Vocal, we developed a Caring and Compassionate New Deal, basically a framework that sort of was modeled after AOC's Green New Deal resolution, really about like, what are the sort of fundamental structural things that need to happen or change in the city of New York that will help actually reduce legitimate instances of violence or crime via sort of the defund idea, which you could find that online. And we had a sort of auxiliary document called the Down Payment for a Caring and Compassionate New Deal that sort of listed some really important initial investments. But I think fundamentally, what we have to talk about how we have to hold the city council and Albany and the mayor's office and the governor's office accountable to the fact that you simply cannot think about policing in this sort of siloed way. I know that sounds very hip, new agey kind of language, but the reality is you don't get to talk about policing and not simultaneously about homelessness, not simultaneously about healthcare. And I think that the new city council, because of people like Tiffany Caban and because of pressures from movements, are coming to this sort of task to govern with that complexity being held. And I do think that we also just have an opportunity in this state right now because of the gubernatorial race, because of the way that Governor Cuomo was removed from office. And we just have a great opportunity. They can do something vastly different. I know they're not going to do everything that I want them to do. That's fine, for now. But I do think that there's really big movement on like the decrim conversation. The reason I keep dropping that so much is because I need everybody to understand, because it's going to be a heavy lift to get people to understand like how this is an evidence-based solution to violence related to drug use or substance use disorders and to end the overdose crisis. Because it's not always as matter of fact as people think it is, because they're not operating from evidence-based realities, but from propaganda related to the drug war, related to, you know, police budgets being inflated, all that kind of stuff. But I think the safer consumption spaces stuff, like the overdose prevention centers, as they're calling it, the state is, I think that's going to move forward. That's going to have significant changes. And if you need any more evidence, just think back to the early 90s and the AIDS epidemic and the legalization of syringe exchange programs and how the number of new infections of HIV among people that inject drugs dramatically dropped the moment we legalized syringe exchange programs. Same will be true for overdose when we legalize safer consumption spaces, and a sort of good consequence will be the reduction in public drug consumption, and also a reduction in, you know, syringes being thrown about wherever they are, because people don't want to do these things generally. They want to have places to put these things, and if there's programs in place, that happens. And then there's all kinds of other unrolling benefits to having things like these kinds of policies. And I think, yeah, that's a long way of saying there's a lot of good stuff happening, and it's just going to take some really powerful political will. And I think that we have elected a city council that is at least open to moving in the direction that we're describing.
Okay, I see Fran Gatellis and John Highland.
And Cecilia.
Yeah, I'll go at the end.
Fran?
Okay. Yeah, hi. A lot of problems that have occurred recently have been at the hands of the DAs and the judges in terms of what's going on right now in New York City prisons. So I'm wondering how our speakers feel that we can limit their power so that they are not sending everybody off to jail when it is clearly inappropriate, and when it's clearly also part of the model where you've got one set of treatment for poor people and a totally different set of the handling of people with money, the people who can afford, for example, to pay bail. So they do the same crime, and yet the poor person gets thrown in jail and persecuted there in so many ways, whereas rich folks can get out of all that. And it seems to me that has to be changed as well. So I'm wondering how you think we can incorporate that into the model of change.
So one answer that I have is that there's a Treatment Not Jail Act that's coming out that a lot of advocates are supporting, where they're diverting, but too many people, as we know, people with mental health concerns and being sent to jail when they should be actually stayed in the community and have access to resources and treatment. So treatment advocates have been advocating for that. And so we can have treatments in the community, like, again, I think it's at respite centers, which are alternatives to hospitalization. We need 24/7 mental health clinics in the community. We need just other, community-based programs to help people stay well in the community and be diverted from the criminal legal system.
Judges and prosecutors are elected. So we have already the mechanisms for holding them accountable, but too often these elections have been basically turned over to machines at the county level. And this is part of a broader political problem. But I think what Christina was alluding to is a larger truth, which is if we get the police out of these functions, then no one is in a courtroom to be mistreated in the first place. And that's the real solution. And I think that's a mistake that's been made, is thinking that we can fix these things with bail reform. No, we have to fix them by ending the war on drugs, ending the criminalization of homelessness, creating safer and healthier communities, period. That is the solution to this. And I don't think we should be putting a huge amount of political capital into trying to reform prosecutors. Prosecutors are going to do what prosecutors do.
Couldn't say that any better, Alex. I think, like, we can have conversations about electing progressive DAs, et cetera, but at the end of the day, they have to do their job. And if the law says that this is illegal, like they probably have some degree of discretion, that's fine. But I mean, that's why we have to undo laws that are not, as Jackie was really saying earlier, laws that are not actually about public safety, but are actually about political realities that are being unnamed. And I think that the drug itself, like it is one of the biggest things. Like for instance, a perfect example is that the drug schedule, which is in 4 parts, and sort of is used supposedly as a way to sort of assess the sort of legitimacy and the value of a substance to human beings, and then laws are justified because of it. So like in the Schedule 1, meaning drugs that are substances that have zero medicinal purpose, that are extremely dangerous for people, etc. There's all this stuff in there, and one of the main ones is marijuana. Yet, which is what's complicating the legalization of marijuana across the country, one of the reasons. But if you understand that marijuana or cannabis is a medicine, and there's medical programs all across the country, yet it's still scheduled, it helps you really understand like a lot of the sort of ways in which we've been taught, even from a scientific point of view about drugs, is not actually true. And therefore, so much of what we're experiencing is not really the fault or the cause is the drug. The cause is a vast amount of other things that I think is clear to everybody in this room. And we just simply have to undo those laws. It's simple as that.
Yeah, I think we have time for John Highland.
And you.
John?
Okay. It's a question basically, I think, for the speakers who know a lot more about this than I do. Is there any traction of the kinds of change that we've been discussing within or among the members of the police department as distinct from the PBA leadership? Any sense among the rank and file that changes might be in their interests?
Yeah, John, I've been talking to cops about these issues for decades here and internationally. And there certainly are a lot of officers who don't want to be in the mental health business, who don't want to be in the homelessness business. There's even a growing number of officers that don't think they should be in the drug business. There's an organization called the Law Enforcement Action Project that was created specifically by law enforcement folks who are opposed to the drug war. But this is a minority of voices within policing. I think a lot of police leaders know that they shouldn't be in mental health, homelessness, maybe even some of them don't think they should be in schools, but they'll never say it because that means they'll lose their budget. And that is bureaucratic priority number 1. So I don't think there's any utility. This is maybe the answer you're really looking for. I don't think there's any utility in spending a lot of effort trying to build common cause with rank and file police officers. They have no power, and the people who speak for them have really the worst politics in the country and just cannot be our allies in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, my question was, every municipality in the state of New York was required by Cuomo last year to present a reform plan to him. Otherwise, he might do something with their budgets. New York City presented a reform plan. Was there anything in that reform plan that was real or would lead to real change within policing?
No. Most of these things were a sham. And the way that the governor structured it ensured that nothing useful would be in them. And there wasn't. And all across the state, huge numbers of people refused to sit on them, dropped out of them. There were big public testimony sessions of people criticizing these things. It was just political theater for Cuomo to appear to do something. And he did absolutely nothing. And then the whole thing was forgotten about.
Okay. Any predictions about Adams? If Adams is elected, what kind of it, since he has a police background, do you think that will influence his style as a mayor?
Well, I mean, I've known Eric a long time. I think that we have to be really concerned about his close ties to big business, real estate, high-priced donors. He's already shown that the door is open to anybody with money. And that is going to make it really hard to enact things like progressive taxation, to rein in the real estate industry. I think the best we can hope for is concerted community pressure to put money into community-based public health strategies. And that's where we should focus our energies for now.
Thank you. Okay, back to you, Anne. I think we're at
So,
time.
yeah, I mean, thank you so much to all of the speakers. This was really quite a very enlightening and interesting session. Alex, I want to particularly thank Alex for leading us to Christina and Jawanza as speakers, because Alex has worked with you folks, and as he does with other on the ground groups, and I think as unionists and organizers ourselves, we know that the on the ground work is really fundamental if we're going to make any changes. So thank you, Alex. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Jawanza. It was great. And I hope that we make some advances in all of the areas that you are hopeful about.
And honestly, I'm so honored to be here and so grateful. But there's one more thing I have to say.
Okay.
I was reading the chat. So real quick, there's one thing you should really look up. I can't remember the person who coined it, but there's this concept called the iron law of prohibition, meaning anytime you prohibit a substance that people want to use, an underground market is going to produce that's another substance that is an equivalent, and typically that's a stronger, more dangerous substance. So like prohibition simply does not work. And to the point about like, how do we deal with like the sort of crimes that arise connected to drugs without a strong police force? Well, number one, you cut at the root, not sort of like people deciding to use drugs or to sell drugs, but you want to eliminate the possibility for illicit markets to thrive. So one way to do that is to legalize all substances and create a regulated market that people can genuinely and meaningfully engage in. And that automatically deals a massive blow to the powerful people that you're thinking about when you're talking about like the drug war. We're not just talking about, you know, cartels. I'm talking about regular everyday New Yorkers who are impacted by these laws, not those folks. And the way that you really deal with those sort of like organized crime circuits is to prevent them from being able to engage in that illicit market in the first place by creating an above ground, a legitimate, regulated market of the substances that people use.
Okay, I see Alex has put that in the chat, and there's other stuff for us to read in the chat. So the homework for the retiree chapter is to, you know, focus on one, you know, little thing that you heard today and research it and write a book report and none of that. Okay.
I just want to say one more thing. I just added the CCIT, correct crisis intervention training, non-police mental health response model in the chat if you want to read it as well.
Thank you so much. Okay, folks. I will be in touch with the speakers, and I think we need to move on to our next part of the meeting. I don't know if Bill is.
Yeah, let me.
Oh, Bill is here. Okay.
You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Unfortunately, you can't hear me. Yeah, let me just pick up.
We can't hear you.
We can.
You can't.
I can.
Yes,
Oh, you can. Okay,
we can hear you.
can.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I just want to pick up quickly on what Ann said, half jokingly about homework, but I really want to thank the speakers because they were provocative in the best sense of the word, and I'm using provocative as a very positive term, in that they really provoked us to take another look at policing and at alternatives to it. A lot to think about. Thank you so much, Christina, Jawanza, and Alex. This was really a wonderful, wonderful program. And thanks to Ann and Cecilia and our chapter's anti-racism committee. We're going to quickly move to the second part of our.
David, can you come here a sec?
Can people mute themselves, please?
I got it.
Yes, Joan DeMeo Lyons, I think if you can demute yourself.
She's muted. She's muted now.
Yourself, that would be appreciated. So let's move on to the second part of the meeting. Something that I did not think we would necessarily be discussing today, but because of a decision in the court of Justice Frank, we are discussing it today. And that is, of course, as a result of a temporary restraining order, the deadline for opting out of the Medicare Advantage Plus plan has been extended indefinitely. So today what we're going to do is not really another information session. We've had those. But what we'll do is we'll update you on what's happening legally as best we know. We cannot answer all the legal questions. And the union's lawyer, Pete Zweibach, notes that he cannot answer all these questions, but we can tell you what we know and maybe what we don't know and what this means in terms of the next several weeks or maybe next several months. I mean, I think there's a very real possibility that this new Medicare Advantage will not be in place as of January 1st, but we shall see. We also want to talk about, for those who do choose to opt out, assuming that that's still going to be an option, well, it will still be an option. How do you pay for it if you're in TIAA? And then maybe briefly we can talk about a city council hearing that was held last Thursday, October 28th. And also note that there's going to be a hearing on November 10th by the Office of Labor Relations, the New York City Office of Labor Relations, a public hearing on the contract that they're signing with the Alliance Medicare Advantage Plus plan. The OLR must have a public hearing before the contract is given to the comptroller. So stay tuned. Pete Zweibach, are you on?
Yes.
You are.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Just give us a brief update in terms of how the judge's decision with the temporary restraining order changes the landscape for our retirees and other municipal retirees, and tell us maybe as much as you know and maybe what we need to find out.
Okay. Bill, having heard.
Zweibach is the in-house lawyer for the Professional Staff Congress. I didn't really give you a proper introduction. So go ahead, Pete.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to give you a lot more information than Bill's summary, because we're really in a period right now where we're not entirely sure what's going to happen and where we are going forward. As you all, I'm sure, know, the judge in the case on October 21st issued a temporary restraining order, really a preliminary injunction, saying that the plan could not go into effect until they had sorted out the implementation. So the judge did not throw out the plan, let's put it this way, the concept. The judge did not enjoin the transition to this new plan from happening. The judge is permitting the Medicare Advantage and all of these changes to go through. However, the judge did say that because the the information and everything we've been saying essentially, which is because the information was not clear, there was no understanding as to what doctors were going to participate, what the payments were, all of the information necessary for someone to make an informed choice as to whether to opt out. That provision was put on hold, that they had to fix that, and they had to submit a plan for fixing that to be approved by the judge. So that is going to happen. We're not exactly sure when that is going to happen. And of course, we're not sure whether or not the first plan is going to be approved by the judge or not approved by the judge, or sent back not approved with specific instructions to the city as to what it is, or to the alliance as to what it is they need to fix and inform the judge about that. We simply at this point do not know. But those are the issues that are going to have to be addressed. As a practical matter, we think that it's going to be difficult to get that done and to get the opt outs and opt-ins in a position where that the plan can go into effect on January 1. But it is technically still possible that that could happen. There's nothing in the decision which says that couldn't happen. It's just hard to see how they could do it. So I'm sorry that I can't be more definite than that, but that's what we know right now. There is, of course, a big question as to what does it mean if people have already opted out, right? That is, the decision came on October 21st, and it may have been that many people have opted out and chose to remain covered by
David,
senior
please
care.
come here.
The judge's decision didn't address it. Not only was it not clear, it simply does not address the issue at all. We have, we read it as requiring the judge to acknowledge that there has to be some new opt-in, opt-out period when the plan making an opt-out period acceptable has been passed, but it doesn't say it. It just simply doesn't address the issue at all. On the 29th, hang on, let me check yes, on the 29th, we submitted a letter to the judge. Now, we're not a party, neither a plaintiff or a defendant. So the judge does not have any legal obligation to rule or even to answer or acknowledge the letter, but we wanted to at least put it before him, where we put this exact issue to them, which is to the judge, which is by October 21st, some number of our retirees and probably other non-PSE retirees had already opted out and chose to remain covered by senior care. And are those people now bound forever, or is there going to be a new period where everybody gets to make a new decision? That is, can you undo that? We don't, obviously it's November 1st. We don't have an answer to that question yet. And as I said, it may be that the judge decides to never answer us, but hopefully this is will alert the judge that this is an issue that is going to come up. And so he probably should make it clear. As we read the decision, it seemed as if, again, there would, by necessity, given what the judge found and what he found were the shortcomings, that by necessity, there would have to be a brand new period where everyone would get another bite at the apple. But again, it doesn't say that. So we can't be sure that that's the case. And I certainly wouldn't want to get up here now and represent to folks that that's what the situation is, because I just don't know. I think that's all I wanted to say. Bill, I know that there are hands, but Bill, was there anything else in particular you wanted me to touch upon just before?
Well, why don't we go to questions first, and then if people have questions for Pete, and then if there's anything that I think should be added, I'll certainly tell you.
Okay, and just to be clear, that I am I am not prepared to pass on the prospects of the litigation going forward, the various legalities of the specific plan. But I'm happy to talk. Okay.
Pete does not have a crystal ball. He doesn't know what the judge is going to decide. And it's probably a dangerous game to try to anticipate what the judge is going to decide. We shall see. John, did you have your hand up from before, or do you have a new question? John Hyland? Unmute yourself.
I should have taken it down, sorry.
Oh, okay. So Evie Rich? Go
Yes,
ahead.
I have several questions for our lawyer. First off, the PSC sent to members notice of the publication of the draft contract between the parties involved. So my first question is, will the lawyer, I understand this contract is 360 pages.
312.
Yes, and so I'm wondering whether or not our lawyer will prepare for us as members a summary of the salient points in the contract, which I think may influence whether or not members decide to opt out or stay in. That's my first question. My second question is, in reviewing that contract, it seems to me that there are three issues that we might highlight. The first issue is the size and comprehensiveness of the network that will be put in place. I'm very interested in ensuring that I, as a member, should I decide to go to this Advantage program, which I don't think I will, which I know I won't, I want to be sure that in that network, there are physicians who will properly be able to serve our members because of their special expertise. My second obvious concern about the contract is, what about the prior authorization policy? I'd like to see that policy spelled out so that members will know what it is they have to do in terms of getting prior authorization. And my final question is, what about the appeals process? Will it be detailed? And will members who want to appeal a decision have an opportunity to do so effectively? So they're really my questions.
You're talking about the appeals process for prior authorizations.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, well, go ahead, Pete.
Okay. As I understand it, there are drafts of highlights, general summaries of the plans that are being prepared by the union, to the extent that we know. And again, one of the issues and one of the reasons that there was the TRO entered was that a lot of these questions that we simply do not know the answer to yet, and that's a problem. So my understanding is that there are these things being done, both by the union as well as by the welfare fund, which it's a separate organization, obviously, but they are also doing it. I personally am not doing it, but I think that summaries are being prepared of some kind, and in terms of advice, Bill, you probably know as much as I do about where we are on that. In terms of the issues that you're raising, again, the advantage, the size of the network and who's going to be in the network, that is something that is inadequate, was found inadequate, and that's one of the problems that the judge has said. You're asking people to make these decisions and you don't even have your full, you don't even have your full roster yet. You've got questions where you say, well, we think they're going to accept, we think they're going to agree. So that was part of why the judge put that TRO in. So I think we're in a waiting period to see what they're going to do with that. That is, I don't think anybody can answer right now exactly who's in the network. That's one of the problems. And now the prior authorization policy and the appeals process, again, that's difficult to answer. They're claiming that there's going to be no change in effect, but I'm not sure that that's entirely true. So part of the problem, and I think this is what you might have been getting at, is the plan itself is not fully fleshed out yet, and they're trying to get people to make decisions, and it's not fully fleshed out. So I'm not sure that I really have good answers to the size, the comprehensiveness of the network, and so on. I mean, or whether the appeals process is going to be adequate. I mean, I think their failure to actually detail that has been their problem with the court.
Well, but my question is, if a contract has 360 pages, surely these kinds of questions should be dealt with in the contract. And I'm asking you, as our lawyer, to summarize how the contract responds to those questions.
I understand. I understand what you're asking.
Under federal law, CMS, Medicare, establishes rules for Medicare Advantage plans in terms of appeals. The time for the appeals, urgent appeals, that's what determines, the appeal process. I mean, the very fact that you have to seek prior authorizations means that a lot of people don't seek them because they don't want to jump through hoops. But there is a process under federal law, as I understand it, that determines the appeal process for prior authorizations in Medicare Advantage plans.
And how that's going to play out in this plan, I just don't know the answer to that.
Susan Foreman? Is Susan, have you unmuted?
Thank you. Okay, if I've already opted out, will my pension be will the fees be deducted from my pension check in November and onward until this is settled?
I can answer that. Absolutely not in November. Even if there was no temporary restraining order, that only would have happened as of January 1st. That January 1st deadline, I think is not part of reality. I may be wrong, but anyway, nothing would happen until January at 1st at the earliest.
Okay.
In addition, can I just take, I'm sorry, Bill.
Go ahead.
We are trying to follow up with Office of Labor Relations to find out if they intend to keep the deadline and what they're doing about deductions and so on for people who have already opted out. And hopefully between the letter to the judge and the communications we're having with OLR, we'll have a final answer. I tend to agree with Bill that the likelihood is that January 1 is not going to be able to be done, and it seems to me it would be a difficult argument for them to make that they're going to start deducting or direct billing when there's no plan in place.
Well, also, there's no
But
ifs and
stranger
buts.
thing is, huh?
There are no ifs and buts. The deadline has been extended, not only by the judge's temporary restraining order, but at the council hearing last Thursday, Helen Rosenthal, in blistering cross-examination, chastised the commissioner, deputy commissioner, about their communications, including one that on their webpage, they still said that the deadline was October 31st. That was changed.
I'm sorry.
That was changed almost immediately after the meeting. And it now says the deadline has been extended.
Right. I said deadline, but I was referring to the January 1st
Friends of
date,
mine,
not the October 31st.
friends of mine in the UFT have been advised and have followed through on rescinding their opt-out.
I think I'm not in a position to advise any individual people as to what to do. If you have some concern that you think that this may impact what you want to do and that you might change your position, then if you have opted out and you wanted to rescind it, like I say, we're saying that there really should be a whole new period, but we don't know that there will be. So I would say, sure, to be on the safe side, one could rescind, send in something saying you rescind your opt-out. It's not clear what effect that will have either. That is, if they say, yeah, well, that's interesting, but the opt-out period is, where you've already opted out and we're not going to give you a chance to rescind. I mean, I don't know. I think that's not going to happen. That would seem like really asking for it, if city from the judge. But stranger things have happened.
There's no chance I'm gonna not opt out, at least until next November. But thank you for answering my question.
Okay. All right, sure.
So Michael Engler? Oh, I'm sorry. Michael Engber.
Yes, I clicked the wrong place. The temporary restraining order did not appear magically as a gift from the judge. An organization that characterizes itself as the New York City Organization of Public Service Retirees hired a lawyer, and that lawyer was the one who argued the petition from that group to against the OLR. And it was in that case that the judge granted the temporary restraining order. There's a Facebook page, but the easy way to find them is nycretirees.org. And they're looking for money from us. I've sent them some money because they want $75,000 to pay their lawyer, who has so far done admirable work for us by getting the temporary restraining order. The other point I wanted to make, these are not questions, it's a tradition to raise your hand for a question and then make a speech. So I've joined in that tradition. I opted out before the TRO was granted. Once it was granted, I was advised by this entity, this organization, to rescind my opt-out. I called that 835 number. I spoke to a representative. I said, I want to rescind my opt-out for myself and for my wife, and was given a confirmation number for each of those opt-out, each of those rescissions rather. And I was told that the rescission of my opt-out was effective immediately. I still reserve the right to opt out at some future time, and I certainly will, in fact, but you do have the right to rescind. If you do, you call them up, that's all you need to do. Make sure you get the time and date of your call, the name of the representative you speak to, and a confirmation number for each of the opt-outs for yourself and a dependent, if that's your situation. It can be done. Thank you.
Yeah, Michael, thank you, Michael. The link to the Facebook page for the group and the link to the web page for the group is actually on the web page that we set up, What's Happening to Retiree Healthcare. It's been up there for quite a while. If people
That's
want.
probably how I found them. I say that's probably how I found them in the first.
Probably is. Well, maybe it is how you found them. It's interesting that you're somebody who has an experience, rescinding your opt-out. I mean, we're not recommending one way or the other, whether you should rescind or not rescind, but obviously you can do it. I mean, and that's the advice that was given by the lawyer for this group, Steve Cohn. But what others do, I mean, that's up to you. William Lanza. I'm sorry, William Laziza.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
I had a question about this whole prior authorization process, and it was sort of addressed previously. But with no information about the process, how can we make an informed choice? And then I was just wondering if there's a request in as part of whatever the judge is going to decide to actually reveal the process behind these death committees or whatever it is that decides when you can have a hip replacement or even get an MRI. I found a booklet online. It had asterisks next to almost every procedure except for their wellness, not the new stuff that they're promoting. So I'm just wondering if we are getting a request for information on the details of this process before they're going to re-announce this new opt-in, opt-out period. And I had a second question of, I didn't opt out yet, and I hopefully think there's going to be enough time to do that later as we get more information. Is there any worries about that? And is the opt-out process still in effect?
Pete?
So,
well, the opt-out process should still be in effect because what the order did was just eliminate the deadline. So I would say that the opt-out process is still in effect. In addition, if in fact you can rescind your opt-out, that would seem to indicate to me that there's a process that's still going on. That is, there's still sort of an open period.
Bill, I'm on now. I apologize for being late.
Yeah.
The opt-out process is still in effect. What's not in effect is the deadline.
Right.
but every other part of the plan is still in effect. So they might even start the plan up January 1st and start charging us copays as if everyone dropped out? Or do you think that we'll be protected by regular Medicare and with no copays after January 1st?
The judge in ruling said that he is very aware of the January 1 start date. The city wants this plan to start January 1. So they are working feverishly, I assume, to develop an implementation plan that will be acceptable to the judge. I think I'm a little loath to predict beyond that how it's going to work, but I think if, we are staying on top of it and we'll keep people informed to the best of our ability. I think we all share your worry, but there are 260,000 retirees. The city's going to have to be somewhat responsible in terms of how this gets implemented, even if there is not an approval from the judge.
Okay, so it's still up in the air. Thank you very much.
It's still up in the air. And in terms of information about prior authorizations, if you don't feel that you have adequate information, you may decide to opt out. Remember, your decision is not written in stone. There are now going to be yearly opt-out periods, probably in October or November, I would guess November, where if you opted out and you want to see that the plan is working over the next year and you want to get back in, you can, or just the opposite. You sign up for the Medicare Advantage. Well, actually it's the default. You don't do anything, you're in it. And are not satisfied, you can opt out next year. You also have a once in a lifetime opportunity, which you can exercise anytime. You don't have to wait for the for the transfer period. If, for example, you have an emergency and you feel that the plan isn't serving you properly, you can quickly opt out of it. So Dana Sutton.
Thank you.
Dana Sutton?
you're muted, Dana.
Okay, all right. Am I unmuted now? I am.
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Thank you. I wanted to raise an issue that I haven't heard talked about at any of these meetings. And even though I retired, I took early retirement in the last century in 1994. I've had two life-threatening situations where I had to be hospitalized immediately. And probably hospitals would have taken me in if I hadn't even any insurance in both cases. But some of us have had hospital issues. And if we don't have the 365-day rider, those cost quite a lot more. When I retired, I was given a booklet published by Blue Cross that said exactly what is in the 365-day rider. It seems that now, even though we still, many of us have the 365-day hospital rider, the benefits have been reduced a great deal. And that's what, as I understand it, can't happen. We're supposed to have the benefits that we were having when we retired. They're supposed to stay with us as long as we're on this planet. So I just wonder if anybody else has any kind of information about what was the benefit when you retired that were in the 365-day rider specifically to you. And if you have that information, can you get that to the PSC retirees Facebook group that hired the judge? Because we're looking for information.
The lawyer, not the judge.
When this changed. I'm sorry, that hired the lawyer. Yes, not the judge.
No, I know that's what you meant to say, but I just.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, at any rate, because this, it's only $1 a month right now, although it'll be almost $3 a month if for everybody, for both those who go into the new Medicare Advantage plan and also for those of us who opt out. So they're tripling the price without any explanation for why the price is being tripled. And then it's not that the price is so difficult for us to pay right now. It's that the benefits are something that isn't covered by Medicare, and we should know what it is. And so I would like to get information from anybody who has that. Thank you.
Debbie, Debbie Bell is the former executive director of the PSC. She served on technical committees for the Municipal Labor Committee around these healthcare negotiations. Debbie,
I don't. I'm a little confused about what Ms. Sutton is referring to. The 365-day hospitalization rider, as I understand it, is very simply a fill-in. If you look at the senior care benefit, there are days when you're not fully covered for hospitalization. And if you buy the rider, this covers you for those days. The implication of what you're saying is that there was more to the benefit than that.
Yes.
And I'm not familiar with the more. So if you have anything in writing, I think it would be useful to for us to be able to see it. If you could get it to
I
Bill,
can,
that
I
would
can
be
Just send it
scan
to
it.
me at retirees@psemail.org, and we'll look into it and
Patrick said
try to get you an
he had
answer as
nothing at
best we
all.
can. So just want to confine this strictly to questions about the legal landscape, given the judge's recent TRO. And questions, please, Lisa Flansreich.
Okay, yes, I'd like to emphasize that the lawyer Stephen Cohn worked a miracle to get the TRO. Just imagine a little Facebook group stood up to the city and we won. I mean, this is like David and Goliath. Okay, I did put in the chat, you can go to New York City, retirees.org, and join the email list. You don't have to get involved with Facebook because we know Facebook is crazy. You can do that. You can be in the loop. In addition, we originally raised $50,000 to pay the lawyer. We restarted our fundraising efforts, and in a week we raised 70 grand because we're going to need money to fight this on a larger level. So
Lisa
donate.
was one of the people who submitted an affidavit as part of the suit filed by the lawyer Steve Cohn. Don Misenkis, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you got it right. Just
Your name there.
A quick footnote to what Mike Engber said about rescinding. My parents were right. If at first you don't succeed, try again. I've noticed a great variation in the competence of the people answering the phones at that helpline. And so I do urge you, if someone says no, call again and get someone else.
Just in that context, let me just say that the commissioner and deputy commissioner were excoriated, I think that's the proper word, by Councilwoman Helen Rosenthal, as I said before, about these communications issues, and particularly the toll-free number and particularly the OLR number. They're two separate numbers, noting, as you just noted, that a lot of her constituents were getting different answers. Sometimes the phones weren't being answered. Rosenthal, chastised them and said, you got to have more toll-free numbers, and or you have to have more people manning or womaning them. But so that has been certainly duly noted to both the Alliance and to the OLR, but I think they knew that before. Susan Wartzman.
Thank you for taking my question. My question is, I understand that we have a delay, that the TRO is evident right now, and there's no pun intended, but I guess there has to be a drop dead date for when they let us know if we're going to be on Medicare, if we're going to have this plan. I assume there has to be a decision by a certain date. Do you have any idea if that's true or not?
Oh, Pete, I mean, you want to respond to that? If not, I will.
Well, I mean, they need to have a plan for the opt-in and the choice period approved by the judge. I'm not recalling that there was a specific deadline decision, but I might be misremembering. I don't remember it being in there, but maybe it was. So they're going to have to come up with that, and I think, as Debbie mentioned, that they want to have this thing started by January 1st. So they're going to have something in place either before January 1st, or they're going to have to move the January 1st date and then have the new opt-in, opt-out period scheduled. And I think they're going to have to, under the plan itself and under the regulations, they're going to have to provide adequate notice to people that there's this this period. That's, I mean, I think that's all I can say at that point. Debbie, I don't know if you want to add.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, but I think the judge made it pretty clear that there'll be a new deadline announced, that you'll have time to make a decision. I'm counting on that. I haven't made a decision yet, although I know exactly what I'm going to do if this plan stays in place. And my sense is the deadline has been extended. I may be wrong, so don't write this down. But given the interaction between the city council members and the commissioner and deputy commissioner over a period of maybe an hour and a half last Thursday at that hearing, it seems to me pretty clear that the OLR folks made it pretty clear that this is going to take some time for them to respond to the judge. I mean, it's interesting that they're not appealing, at least so far. No, the city hasn't appealed. And then, Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, then I think their plan has to go to the lawyer for the plaintiffs, and he has 7 days to look at it, and then it goes back to court, and then eventually, a decision is made. So I don't think, maybe we should go on the assumption that it is going to start on January 1st, the new plan, but boy, I'd be really surprised if it did. So one more on Levon. I want to get to this TIAA question, which I know is important for lots of you, since the majority of our members are in TIA and not TRS, and the method for paying for the opt-out, if indeed we have to pay $191 and what was it, 57 cents or something like that, is to do it through your pension, but we'll discuss that in a moment or two. Adina Schwartz? Or was this just, no, Adina?
No one here has mentioned the political change, but listening to the tape for the lawyer for the union and reading the pieces, the New York Daily News has been covering this. Eric Adams is very much, as a retiree, a New York City retiree, is very much against the healthcare change and has come out against it, and has come out about welcoming the decision, and has come out explicitly as saying Mayor de Blasio didn't understand how this is impacting people's lives, because, and this is why you need a union member as your mayor. So is there, in view of that, I thought there was a possibility, and apparently the lawyer who brought the case did too, that it could fall into his lap, especially with the delay, and he could just not do the stuff that's needed to move the process further.
Point well taken. We'll talk about this and maybe what it means in a couple minutes, but thank you for raising that. And yes, Eric Adams, in a front page headline in the Daily News said that this plan is bait and, or is it switch and bait or bait and switch? But of course, he doesn't become mayor. I think we can say that he's going to be the next mayor, even though the vote isn't until tomorrow, until what, January 1st. Bonnie Nelson, I assume Bonnie is here and
I'm here.
Can speak to the issue of TIAA. And if you haven't already, you should read Bonnie's article on this in not the current newsletter, but the October newsletter. And I believe that we're putting the link not only to the retiree healthcare page, but also to that newsletter in the chat. So Bonnie, go ahead.
Okay. So the question for retirees who are on TIA is, how do you pay your healthcare premium if you decide to opt out? because right up till now, we've been paying $1 or $2 a month just for the rider. But if we opt out, the premium will be total with the rider $194.40. And for those of us who just annuitized only the bare minimum, $10,000, that whatever you're getting per month is not going to cover that rider. So we have met with the Office of Labor Relations to find out what happens if people's annuity is not sufficient to pay that amount. And they have assured us that in no case are they going to let people wind up without health insurance because of failure to pay premiums. What they have told us is that Emblem, which is the provider for senior care, will do direct billing. So if people do not have enough money in their monthly annuity payments, they will eventually be billed by Emblem directly, and then they can pay directly. We don't know yet what kind of payment that will be, whether they have to send you a bill every month. We assume there will be some sort of automatic payment that you can set up. It's kind of clunky how this works out. In January, if this does go through in January, OLR will run a computer program that will try and deduct your premium from your TIA annuity pension, from your annuity, your monthly payment. If your annuity is sufficient to cover your premium, then the appropriate amount will be deducted from that and you will have paid your premium. If your annuity is not sufficient, then you will still be covered by health insurance, but the following month in February, they will try and deduct twice that amount from your annuity payment. If it's still not sufficient to cover the payment, then then Emblem will direct bill you. Now, whether they'll direct bill you immediately and you'll have to pay 2 months, or they'll bill you in March for 3 months, we don't know. We're still trying to get answers from a lot of these things. So if you want to be direct billed, you just sit tight and eventually you'll get a bill from Emblem Health. If you prefer to pay your premiums through your annuity, as you've been doing, then you have to check to see if your annuity is going to be sufficient to pay the premiums. If you're not sure, contact TIAA. You will need to contact them if you want to increase your annuity. You have to find out how much money you have to annuitize in order to have a monthly payment that's sufficient to pay this nearly $200 premium. And we don't know if this is actually happening in January. So if you do want to pay with, have the payment taken out of your annuity, then talk to your TIA advisor and find out when you have to make this decision by in order for it to go into effect for January 1st, if that's when it's going to happen. Or if it's not going to happen in February 1st, what would be the deadline then? Because if your annuity is not large enough at the first payment, it's unlikely you're going to be able to catch up. So you'll be on direct billing, even if you don't want to be. So your choices are, if you wish to have your, if you wish to pay with your annuity, then, talk to TIA, find out when you have to make that decision. If you really want to be direct paid, you don't do anything, direct billed. And if you wind up increasing your annuity and then this plan never goes into effect, the worst that happens is you'll get an extra $200 a month in payment in annuity for life. It's not terrible. If you really wanted to annuitize and you missed the deadline to do it and it's too late to go into effect before the plan starts, you'll be direct billed. You'll still be on the insurance that you want. So, basically that's it.
Yeah, now people have questions, but before that, let me just say that the we that Bonnie is referring to is really a team that the PSC has put together that includes Bonnie and myself, and now is also going to include Jim Pearlstein from the Retirees chapter. It includes the current president, James Davis, and the past president, Barbara Bowen. It includes, in fact, he's really at the center of it, Dean Hubbard, the new executive director of the PSC, and it includes somebody who's already spoken to us today and at past meetings, Debbie Bell, the former executive director, and it includes folks from the PSC CUNY Welfare Fund, the executive director, Donna Costa, and the communications director.
And we have another
And
meeting.
also what?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Bill.
And it includes, somebody who's well-schooled in health policy and actually teaches it at Baruch and Sarah Lawrence, whom the PSC has hired on a part-time basis to assist us, and that's Barbara Caress, who I believe is also on this call. Let me just, before we open it up to questions about TIAA, explain that there are just layers and layers of complexity that this team has to deal with, because there are just so many different players in this thing. TIAA, CUNY, OLR, Emblem, and we tried to set up meetings, with all these players, and are still meeting with them to try to sort this out. And the PSC does not have an official relationship with TIAA. CUNY does. But with that said, if people have questions.
Let me answer something right now. Yes, I'm on TIAA. And I actually spoke with my TIAA advisor this morning. I had a scheduled meeting, and most of the information that he has gotten from me. So we have been trying to get CUNY to communicate better with TIAA to make sure that they're up to date on things. My TIAA advisors did not know that the judge had issued a temporary restraining order. He asked me to send him more information. So you need to stay alert to what's going on. I think we have a meeting scheduled, this group that Bill just described, with Office of Labor Relations and CUNY this coming Friday. And we'll try and get more details on how this process is going to work. Okay.
And right, I think about 90% of our members are in TIAA and maybe 10% in TRS. And as I noted before, administratively, what happens is the city tries to exact payments through your pension system. So that's why TIAA is an issue. I see two hands. Adina, do you have a question on this? I know you just.
No, I'm sorry.
No,
I didn't
no,
get
nothing. You don't apologize. Just put down your hand. So Francine Agra-Sider.
Hi, it's actually her husband, Gerald Sider. In my understanding of TIAA annuities, when you die, they own the money in it. In other words, it doesn't revert to your estate. Annuities pay a higher payout than the regular TIA, but one of the reasons it does is they eat that money when you die. Is that the case with this annuity?
Yeah, it's just like any other annuity. You can annuitize with a life joint with a life partner, so that if you die first, your partner gets the monthly payment for the rest of his or her life. And you can also have a 20-year guarantee. So if both of you die, you can have a beneficiary who will get the payment for 20 years. So generally they sell these saying that, if you choose to have the 20-year payment, then probably you're getting the money back over the long run. So, but this is, between you and your TIA rep.
Oh, so if you take the 20-year, I'm sorry, I'm not that good financially. If you take the 20-year payback, basically you get back the $10,000 over or whatever you put in over the long run. And so it's not actually financing TIA.
Right, right. This is all right. I mean, annuities are generally regulated by New York State, and my understanding is the TIA annuity has a better payback than many of the others, but talk to your financial advisor.
Okay, thank you.
And Lisa Flansreich?
Yeah, okay. I wanted to unmute. Okay, so regarding the TIA annuity, I would recommend that you check out the payout. The payout right now on my $10,000 annuity is 4.5%, which is extremely low. And I would consider taking the money that they're going to ask from you, about $25,000 more, and just looking for a better return, because they're out to make money and it's your money. They think it's their money, but it's your money. I'm just telling you. Thank you.
Okay, Lisa. Yeah. So any other questions on this? Not advice in terms of where to put your money, but okay. The one other thing, you know, I think we can bring this to a close. And if you have questions, I mean, obviously, you know, send them to us. Questions about the legal issues and questions about TIAA. The last thing I'll just say is that we're at kind of a interesting, maybe interesting isn't the best word here, political moment, because as somebody noted earlier, the presumptive mayor made his bait and switch comment, which was dramatized on a front page headline of the Daily News a couple of weeks ago. He takes office in early January, I believe on January 1st. The judge's temporary restraining order delays this whole process, so this plan may not go into effect until January 1st. Meanwhile, the Office of Labor Relations has put out a notice that they're going to have a hearing on the contract, on the draft contract, on November 10th. On the retiree healthcare webpage, I've put a link to that notice. And the link sends you to a page, you know, where you have the notice and where you also have a link if you want to, God forbid, read the entire 312-page draft contract that's going to be the focus of this hearing. Let me just say, then the contract has to go to the controller. It's just very rare that a controller, you know, after a public hearing, will come up with a negative decision on a contract, but it could happen. The next controller is probably going to be Brad Lander. Let me suggest this, and I say this coming off the city council hearing the other day. It's clear from that hearing that council people all over the city have heard from hundreds and hundreds of municipal retirees. And of course, what they've heard doesn't paint a pretty picture. And so what was very interesting about that hearing last Thursday was just how assertive city council members were, particularly Helen Rosenthal, but also Eric Dinowitz and others, in raising questions to the commissioner and deputy commissioner from the Office of Labor Relations. And those questions gave pause, let me just put it that way, to I think both the commissioner and the deputy commissioner in terms of things that their office has to rectify, as did the judge's temporary restraining order. I would suggest in this political moment that people get in touch with their city council representatives and ask them to push the council to direct action to get the city to pause on this. I would also suggest that you send your letters to the current controller and I guess the controller-elect, who is probably going to be Brad Lander, raising your issues. I'm not optimistic about what's going to happen, but nor could we have predicted what happened as a result of the work of this Facebook group that brought the case to Judge Leon E. Frank's court. Who knows? And what we'll do is we'll, on our end, discuss the possibility of setting up maybe some Act Now letters that people can send to their council people and that people can send to the controllers through the PSC website. But as Yogi Berra used to say, it ain't over until it's over. So stay tuned, stay active. My guess is that even at our next chapter meeting on Monday, December 6th, we're probably going to be spending a half an hour to an hour on this again, because I don't think it's all going to be resolved, but who knows? And we're going to have a program on Monday, December 6th, looking at kind of the new political landscape as a result of the elections tomorrow, and as a result of the fact that Governor Cuomo has stepped down, and now there's a situation in New York State, which I think is much more favorable in terms of funding for CUNY and funding for our students. And so we will have speakers, you know, like addressing that. But my guess is that we'll also be, once again, at the end of the meeting, you know, talking about the changes in retiree healthcare. And then just let me note one other thing before we sign off. On October 20th, we had a forum, a meeting, not an official chapter meeting, but a chapter meeting on the Palestine-Israel resolution that was passed by the PSC-DA last June 10th. There's a brief report on what happened at that meeting in the November newsletter. And there was a link provided in the last email blast to that newsletter. We'll have a fuller report in the next newsletter, and the chapter will send a report to the Delegate Assembly. But with that said, unless, well, I see one more hand up. Colette Wagner, we'll give you the last word.
Hi, Bill. Thank you. And by the way, thank you so much for all of your work on this issue, and it's really most appreciated. This is a related question to TIAA. Those of us who file for IRMA, I understand some people got their checks about a week and a half ago, but a group of my friends and I who are expecting IRMA checks have had nothing. Does the chapter have any information about the status of IRMA reimbursement checks?
The best person to contact on this is the communications director of the PSC CUNY Welfare Fund, Pat Smith. You know, you've seen at these meetings before. I mean, he really kind of keeps tabs on this. He may be off. I think he was off last week on vacation. Hopefully he's back this week, but he's the person to really contact about this, and can give you advice on how to navigate the OLR bureaucracy, particularly on issues like Medicare Part B reimbursements and IRMA checks. So that's what I would suggest.
Thanks, Bill. I'll follow up. Appreciate it.
Okay, and on that note, stay tuned. You have the link to the chapter's webpage on retiree healthcare. That page is updated almost daily. That will have the latest. If something breaks, I mean, clearly, you know, we'll send out an email blast to members. And shortly, you're going to get another letter from James Davis, the president of the PSC, in terms of these latest updates. So take care, everybody. And again, I'm going to quote Yogi Berra, it ain't over till it's over. We shall see what we shall see on all this. Stay tuned and stay active.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.